Hello everyone, Tony Costa here, Toronto Apologetics. Glad to have you along. I am here in Minneapolis, Minnesota with my dear friend, Reverend Samuel Green from Tasmania, Australia.
Yeah.
Every time I think of Tasmania, sorry Sam, I can't help thinking of the Tasmanian Devil from Looney Tunes, from the cartoon. And I don't think Tasmanian devils look anything like that.
Well, they don't stand upright. they're only, they don't have a big body. They've got a tail, and you don't often see them because they just come out at night and they eat dead animals.
So they eat carrion.
They eat carrion. That's it. So,
and you can't, and you'll never forget the sound that Tasmanian devils make when
I'm not going to make that sound because I'll embarrass myself. But we're very proud of our Tasmanian devils.
Yes.
And so they're very dear to us amongst all of our animals. The Tasmanian devil is a unique one because there are wallabies and kangaroos elsewhere in Australia, and we've got them too.
Right.
But the devils are only with us there. So they may have been elsewhere a long time ago, but they're unique to us now.
Right. And Sam, you've been involved in Islamic apologetics the same time I have, around 30 years.
Yes, that's
wonderful.
correct.
So from the early 90s, 91, 92, and that's fantastic. So we do share a common theme there. So if I can just ask, Sam, what got you interested in Islamic apologetics?
Sure. It was becoming a Christian at university, and then after being a Christian for a short time, realizing that I needed to be sharing the gospel about God's love for people, what God has done for us, the free gift of grace, the free gift, and how good that is. It is such a good thing to have God has done it for us. And so I started to share that with people, and with many of my friends, they sort of had a Christianized background, and we might talk about the existence of God or something like that.
Right.
Or they might believe it. I had a number of my friends become Christian. But then with my Muslim friends, what I found was that they were prepared to basically attack every aspect of the gospel. They denied that Jesus was God. They denied the cross. They denied the Bible was reliable. And so when I started to encounter this, I went, wow, these people are prepared prepared in a way that other people aren't. So within my community, within my Christian community, there weren't many of us engaging with Islam.
Right.
And so I thought, well, I'm here, and I may as well start doing it. And so I went to an Ahmed Deedat meeting, and I saw the scale of their preparation, and I thought, I'm going to start to develop materials. Right. And then, of course, this is in the early 90s, and then by the sort of later 90s, the internet starts coming online. So about 98. And then that's when people like myself and yourself and a whole lot of others, we all start to connect online. Right. And then we start to encourage each other, and we start to make a network. Right. So that's sort of a brief history.
But you have a claim to fame too, Sam, because you were also confronted Ahmed Deedat in a Q&A, and that was in Durban, South Africa?
No, that was actually in Sydney.
It was in Sydney, Australia.
So I was living in Sydney. So this is 96.
Okay.
And he came to Australia, and you could imagine that the Muslims were very enthusiastic. They were, their champion had arrived.
Right.
And the Sydney Town Hall was packed, and I went there. I was quite frightened, to be honest. I was frightened going there because I just went by myself. And but once he started just saying this nonsense from the Bible, I'm going, just read it. Can't you read in context?
Right.
At least do us the courtesy of reading it properly.
Of course.
Which you didn't do.
Right.
And so my fear was gone. I was just, I wanted to ask some questions at this point. I have to say though that the person who got up before me, and if you can watch this video, it was the Easter message in 1996 in Sydney, Australia. But the person before me got manhandled and grabbed. He was asking questions, and these two big guys came and grabbed him and then dragged him off. And so I was next, and I was going,
I'm not sure if I will ask a question.
But it was all fine. It was fine. I mean, and I was allowed to ask my question, and we had a dialogue, and so you can see.
Wonderful. So you can check that out on YouTube. Sam Green's claim to fame there. And if they wanted to check that, it just search Sam Green and Ahmadidat.
You could go Samuel Green and Ahmadidat, or if you go to my YouTube channel.
Yes. And what's your YouTube channel?
It's at the moment it's called Engaging with Islam. I'm still working out how handles work on YouTube, because I think that changes your URL. But
yes.
But it's Engaging with Islam.
Right.
Samuel Green, Ahmadidat, you'll find it.
Wonderful. Yeah. So check that out, folks. It's a great website. So today we want to talk about Muhammad and his miracles, or at least his alleged miracles, supposed miracles. So maybe you can fill us in a little bit on that.
Sure. So if obviously Christians are familiar with Moses doing signs from God, and Jesus giving signs, and that these are how God also testified to his actions.
Yes.
So we're familiar with that idea.
Yes.
Now, when Muhammad comes along, he's making big claims. He's claiming to be equal to Moses. He's claiming to be equal to Jesus. And so the people around him, ask him, well, where are your signs? If you're saying you're a prophet like Moses and you're like Jesus, well, these people had the evidence of God's power in their life. And I just want to point out that, the Bible just doesn't do this for everyone.
Right.
So for instance, with John the Baptist, I think it's John chapter 4, the people say, John did no miracle, yet everything he said about this man, Jesus, is true.
Yes.
And so, it's not that people said, oh, here's a prophet, he did a miracle.
Right.
So with John the Baptist, he didn't.
Right.
And so it's not that people are just saying that you have to have them, but when you're a prophet of significance, where you're bringing a whole new covenant and you're bringing a big change, then you would expect them. You would expect them,
of course,
right? And so I just want to say, that they don't automatically make them up, but you do expect them as well. Now, what happens is people, if you read the Qur'an on multiple occasions, people say to Muhammad, why haven't you done a miracle? So I've got a couple of references here.
Sure.
Let me just read them out.
Okay.
So this is, let me just go down here. Where are we? So this is Surah 20, verse 133. And it says, they say, this is the Meccans say, they say, if only he would bring us a miracle from his Lord. So, if only he would bring us a miracle, right? Has there not come unto them the proof of what is in the former scriptures? Now, that's an interesting answer, isn't it?
Yes, very strange.
Right? So, Muhammad, why haven't you given us a miracle?
Right.
And his answer that he's supposed to say to them is, look in the former scriptures.
Right.
Okay? Here's another one. So this is Surah 28, verse 48. Why are not signs sent to him like those which were sent to Moses?
Right.
So this is, they're saying you claim to be like Moses, and Muslims will say that to us. They'll say, oh, he's a prophet like Moses.
Right.
And Muhammad's probably making these claims.
Sure.
And so they say, well, where are your signs like Moses? That's a pretty big part of who Moses was. That was how God authenticated his prophet. And so, they say, where are the signs? And, he doesn't say, well, I do signs.
Right.
Here they are. It's, I don't do signs like Moses.
Right.
And I'll just look up the last one. Where is the one I was wanting here? I'll look at, say, Surah 29, verse 50. But they say, and again, this is the people who don't accept Muhammad, but they say, why are not signs sent down to him from his Lord? Say, signs are only with Allah, and I am only a clear warner.
Yes.
And so here we see that the Qur'an's reply, when people say to Muhammad, where are these signs? If you claim to be like Moses, like Jesus, where are your signs? His response is, I am only a warner.
Right.
Now, if you said to me, where are your signs? And I said, I'm only a warner. What I'm saying to you is, I don't give signs.
Exactly.
Right? That's the meaning of the words.
Yes.
Right? I don't give signs. I'm just here to speak the message.
Right.
Now, why is this important? Now, what we've just said here, we were looking before at the introduction to the translation of the Quran by Muhammad Marmaduke Pickthall.
Right.
And that was a very famous English translation in its day, very famous, a convert to Islam. And he says in his introduction, I believe it's page 24 or XXIV.
Yes.
In his introduction, he says that the Qur'an is Muhammad's only miracle.
Right.
Right. And so the Qur'an does talk about a miracle that Muhammad gives, but it speaks of it as the Qur'an. Nobody can make anything like it and all that.
Right.
So he doesn't give signs like Moses or Jesus, but the Qur'an is his sign.
Right.
And so that's sort of how the argument goes. But he doesn't give signs like Moses and Jesus.
Right.
This is the point.
Right.
Now, why this is an issue is that when you read the Hadith,
yes,
Muhammad does all types of miracles.
If you can explain maybe for our viewers, Sam, what do you mean by the Hadith?
So, in Islam, there's the Qur'an.
Mm-hmm.
So we've got here's a Qur'an here. So you've got Qur'an, but Islam is not based on the Qur'an.
Mm-hmm.
It's based upon the Qur'an and the Hadith. Now, the word Hadith means a short account. And there are these big volumes, I can't stretch my arms out wide enough to show you how many volumes of Hadith there are. And these are books which collect together all these little stories of Muhammad's life, different things he said at different times, and him doing miracles, and him doing, saying how to wash your hands, and how to do all these types of things. And so each Hadith might only be 3 or 4 sentences long, and it will be told by somebody. So it might say, this was told or narrated by Ibn Abbas, and he will tell you something about Muhammad.
Yes.
And now, these are crucial because this is where the sunnah or the practices of Muhammad come from. So the Quran is what he claimed the angel Gabriel gave him, but his practices, which for Muslims is just as important, actually comes from these other books called the Hadith. Now, in these Hadiths, you have Muhammad doing all these types of miracles.
Right.
Now, what we need to understand also is that the Hadiths are written up centuries after Muhammad.
Yes, at least 2 centuries.
At least 2 centuries.
Right.
So just think about that. That's sort of beyond. I'm trying to think of early church fathers.
Yes.
You're into what, Tertullian? I was going to say, we both said Tertullian.
Yeah, Clement of Alexandria.
Yeah. So it's all in the 200s.
Yes.
And so imagine if the information we were getting on Jesus was coming from the beginning of the 3rd century. Right. Now, we don't have that at all. That's foreign to us.
Right.
Any story about Jesus just on its own from the 3rd century we'd be highly suspicious of.
Right.
But this is where these books come from for Muhammad's life.
Well, if I can put into maybe a comparison, it's like when we think of the United States Declaration of Independence in 1776, where it separated from the British Crown. Imagine for 200 years there was nothing written on the War of Independence until you get to 1976. So you got 1776, add 200 years, you get 1976. Imagine there's nothing written about what the Founding Fathers said, what they agreed, where they met. Nothing is written until 1976. And that's a huge gap. It's a huge gap of time.
Now, what a Muslim would push back on you there.
Sure.
So you're absolutely right, but a Muslim would push back and say, these stories of Muhammad, these hadiths, that each of them has been faithfully passed on. And we know they've been faithfully passed on because they have their own system of authentication.
Yes, isnad.
So it would be the isnad is called the chain of narration. So where did this story come from? Who told this story to this person? Who told it to this person? And so it's like a chain.
Right.
They have a chain going all the way down back to the person who saw Muhammad doing it, or to Muhammad himself saying it. And that's the idea. Now, the thing is, though, there were millions of hadiths written about Muhammad which were false. And so Muslims acknowledge that people were just inventing things about Muhammad.
Yes.
And so what happens is that a few centuries later, as you were saying, a couple of centuries in, there were famous collectors of the Qur'an, in particular a man named Imam Bukhari and Imam Muslim. And there are others, and they gather together these hadiths and they inspect them and they work out whether or not they're authentic.
Right.
And there's meant to be a system of authentication. One is does it agree with the Qur'an? You know, if it's against the Qur'an,
Right.
then you would assume then that's not true.
Right.
And then does it have a reliable chain of narrations and all that type of thing? Now, what's interesting about this is Muslims base a lot of their beliefs on these hadiths.
Mm-hmm.
But as I said, the Quran is clear, and we can show you translators of the Quran who agree with this, that Muhammad did no miracle. Right? But when you go to the hadiths of Bukhari or Muslim, he does all types of miracles.
Right, all types.
Yeah. And so these are in the hadiths, which are considered to be the most authentic. They've got impeccable chains of narration. They have multiple people reporting it. You know, they've got all these things, but they're saying that Muhammad split the moon in half.
Yes.
That water poured out of his hands. That he multiplied and fed people and did all these things.
Yeah.
And you just go, like, just as a reader, I'm going, hang on, I've just finished reading the Quran. I'm now reading the Hadith. And this is saying the exact opposite.
Yes.
It's saying the exact opposite. Now, there are some Muslims who just go, yeah, we don't trust the Hadith.
Right.
And so that translator of the Quran, he probably wouldn't accept those Hadiths that do this. And then there are other Muslims who don't accept those Hadiths.
Right.
But then there are others who really, you know, they dig their heels in and say, no, these Hadiths are genuine, and they try to give reasons for why, you know, how to harmonize those two pictures.
Right. It's quite interesting because I my personal view, Sam, is that the reason why you see all these miracles springing out and being mentioned in the Hadith, I think it's because when Muslims were engaging with their Christian neighbors, Christians kept pounding on the fact that Muhammad did not perform miracles.
Yeah.
And so I think what we see here is 200 years later, we're seeing these traditions arising where Muslims are making this up because they're trying to equate Muhammad with Jesus or other prophets.
With Moses.
With Moses. I mean, even multiplying food to feed people is clearly the feeding of the 5,000 when we think about the gospel accounts. And so I think the Hadith are reflecting what is going on. You know, scholars talk about the Sitz and Laban, the situation.
I was just going to bring up form criticism.
Yes, form criticism.
Yeah.
And so I think that what we have here is clearly Muslim narrators are trying to say, well, yeah, our prophet did miracles too, even though it flies in the face of the Quran. So I think that in my opinion, they were pushed to the wall by their Christian neighbors, and they felt they needed to somehow justify Muhammad as a prophet by creating stories of his miracles. But even the Isnad, wouldn't you agree that when they say, well, this person got it from this person, but how do you check the narrators, whether they're reliable or not? Where's the checks and balances?
Well, they try to have biographies written for the transmitters of Hadith. So there are books, I've forgotten the exact title, and it's where it's a biography of all the Muslim lives of everyone who's involved in transmitting anything.
Yes.
And you can look up, were they reliable and how should they be considered?
Yes.
But what tends to happen is that, you know, for Sunnis, Shia transmitters are false and liars, right? Whereas for Shias, many of the Sunni transmitters are false and liars.
Right.
And so, you know, how you judge a person really depends upon which group in Islam you are. And so, you know, and I can understand that. I can understand it. And look, so for me, the fact that these hadiths are clearly teaching what's against the Quran shows that whole method of authentication doesn't work.
It doesn't.
It doesn't work. And you need to actually use the standard historical methods that we use for Josephus and Tacitus and things where Muslims go, oh, we don't do that because we've got our chains of narration.
Right.
I'm saying your chains of narration don't work.
No.
Right? They don't work. Now, just on that point, and I want to come back to something on the Quran.
Sure.
But what's interesting is that the chains of narration also authenticate the Quran.
Right.
So when you get these different Qurans, and we looked at that in the previous episode.
Yes.
Each Quran has a chain of narration as well.
Right.
So you can see why Orthodox Muslims want to maintain that Muhammad did miracles, because if you say he didn't, then all that the chain of narration system doesn't work.
Right.
And that's what the Qur'an hangs on as well.
Right.
So they have, for some, they have to maintain this
Right.
at every point. And so what I wanted to quickly do is look at how would they push back at us? Because I've been talking to lots of Muslims on this, and I plan on doing something more comprehensive.
Okay.
But what they would say is, you're misrepresenting the Qur'an. Yes, it does say that Muhammad was just a warner in some verses, but in others, I think it's Surah 54, it says he split the moon.
Yes.
He split the moon.
Yes.
Now, first of all, I want to say that the splitting of the moon is the normal language for the sign of the final hour.
Right.
And that comes up. It's the sky, in other verses of the Quran, the sky is split and mountains are split.
Yes, it's apocalyptic language.
It's apocalyptic language.
Yes,
and so it's just saying that, the hour is coming near.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
And what's interesting is that chronologically, that surah, which speaks about the moon being split, is very early. And I read to you some verses before about Muhammad not doing miracles.
Right.
There's actually 13 that I've gathered. There may be more. They all come chronologically after the moon was meant to be split, right? So if Muhammad had actually split the moon, and this is like to the whole world, so this is a cosmological
They claim
thing.
Chinese astronomers noticed it.
Yeah, and so that they even say that NASA has seen the split line in the moon and all this stuff. If he had done this huge demonstration, you could not get 13 verses after this chronologically saying, why won't you give us a miracle?
Yes.
And him saying, I'm just a warner.
Right.
Right? Like, that just doesn't make sense.
It doesn't.
You can't do that 13 times if I've just showed the whole world the cosmological miracle.
Yes.
So it just doesn't work.
It does not.
Others will say, he was like, they call him a magician, and so just as the Jews said Jesus did things by magic, they say Muhammad was a magician. But when you actually read what they mean by magician, what they mean is magic words.
Yes.
Because remember that a main part of a magician is he knows the secret words to get things done for you.
Right.
And so, like at the beginning of the Quran, there are those, beginning of surahs,
Yes.
there are those letters that no one knows what they mean.
Yes.
Well,
yes.
That is what magicians do.
Yeah.
They go Aleph, Ba, Ta.
Yes.
What does it mean?
Yeah.
Well, that's what magicians do. They have magic words.
Yes.
They have magic words. And so when they say Muhammad's a magician, they're not saying he's a magician because he's doing miracles.
Right.
They're saying he's a magician because he's got magic words that he says.
Right. Right.
And
it reminds me of the Arab folklore, the abracadabra.
Yeah.
And the cave opens for you.
Yeah. No, exactly. It's those types of
powers
things.
in the words.
Yeah. And so my point here is that Muslims will say that the Quran doesn't in fact deny that he did miracles.
Right.
And they give these reasons, but none of those reasons are valid when you look at them. And I've just given a couple there. So the point is, for me, the bottom line is there was no accompanying evidence from God that Muhammad's a prophet.
Right. And that's a good point you made there, Sam, because, think about it. Splitting the moon, either Muhammad had a very, very big sword. And if that actually happened, and we're told, these Chinese astronomers noticed this and so forth, you're right. Why would you need to ask for signs when if you could split the moon? That's a sign. That is a
people would be in fear. People back in that day would be in terror. They'd be in terror,
of course. And so, but you're right. That language of mountains collapsing. You see this in the Book of Revelation, and the sun darkened, the moon turning to red as blood, and the stars falling from heaven. This is clearly apocalyptic imagery. But you're right. If he had in fact split the moon, then why would people be asking him for signs? So it just doesn't seem to follow. And I think that's the argument of the Quranis too, that the Quranis reject the Hadith because they see all these contradictions. And I've met Muslim scholars who personally doubted Bukhari and Muslim whenever they would conflict with what the Quran says.
Yeah.
And so I think this is a major problem in Islam.
Yes. So.
Well, thank you so much, Sam, for that interesting discussion. And folks, once again, we want to thank you for joining us. And and joining us in this lovely living room. We're being hosted by a lovely family in Christ, and we thank God for them. So thanks again, everyone, for joining us, and we encourage you to subscribe to Reverend Samuel Green's YouTube channel and go to his website. All of that will be in the description box. And also subscribe to Toronto Apologetics, where you'll get videos like this, and like and share. And so take care, everybody. Until next time, Lord bless you. Bye for now.
Bye. Okay, now let's just check.